This video is going to cover strategies to add integers. So first let's define what an integer is. I define integer as all of the positive and negative whole numbers including 0. So I have a number line here. We're going to use this number line a lot today. And what it shows is the positive numbers that we are used to are over here on the right. So these are your positive numbers. Okay, 1, 2, 3. We kind of call them our counting numbers. And then to the left we have our negative numbers. And right smack dab in the middle of the positive and negative numbers, we have the number 0. So what you'll hear me say a lot in this video is how far away, the distance from 0, okay? So if we start right here in the middle at 0 and move to the right, we're gaining positive numbers and we're getting further away from 0. So the number 4 is further away from 0 than the number 2, okay? And the same thing happens in the negative direction. When we move to the left of 0, we're getting further away from 0 and we're gaining more negatives. So negative 8 is more negative or further away from 0 than negative 3. And we're going to compare how much further one number is from 0 than another, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we're first going to look at what happens when I add integers with the same sign. So what happens when I add two positives or I add two negative numbers. So we know that when I add a positive with another positive, that answer is always going to be positive. And when I add a negative number with another negative number, that answer is going to be negative. So I'm going to demonstrate this for you, and I'm going to use some counters to help us out. So I'm going to draw it out. If I'm trying to do 6 plus 4, I know I have 6 positive numbers, and then I'm getting 4 more positive numbers. And so when I add those, it's asking us for the total, and you can count them up and know that you have 10 total. We can also use a number line to do this. So I know I'm going to start with 6 positives, and then I'm getting more I'm adding, which means I'm going to move to the right. I'm going to add 4 more. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see that you end up at 10 and we confirm our answer. Okay? So that's what happens when we add a positive and a positive. Now let's look at a negative plus a negative. Negative 3 plus negative 2. If I have 3 negatives and I'm getting more, I'm getting 2 more negatives. The question is, how many negatives do you have in total? And here you have 5. So my answer is negative 5. Now let's show that on the number line. So I'm going to start over here at negative 3. Now before we had said when we add, we're moving to the right, but we're adding negatives. And when we get negatives, we know that is moving to the left. So I'm going to actually go to the left 2, and I'm going to end up at negative 5 as my answer. Okay? So we always know that when you have a positive plus a positive, your answer is going to be positive. And when you have a negative plus a negative, that answer is going to be negative. So now let's look at this a little bit. What happens with the number 0? So like I said, 0 is that cutoff. It's the middle number between the positives and the negatives. And what's also important is it's our additive identity. So what that means is if I take any number, positive or negative, so let's say I have the number 8, and I add 0, that means you're gaining nothing, so you're going to get 8 back. And the same thing happens with negatives. If I take something like negative 1 and I add 0, I'm going to stay at negative 1. Okay? But what's more important with 0 here is that if you have an equal number of positives and negatives, they're going to cancel out to become 0. So let's look at some examples of this. If I have negative 5 plus 5, I have 5 negatives and I have 5 positives. those two, each positive and negative, are going to cancel until you're left with nothing, until you're left with 0. And we can see that and prove that on a number line. If I start at -5 and I'm adding positive, so I'm going to go to the right 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I hit that middle value. I hit 0. So when you have an equal number of positives and negatives, you're zeroing out, okay? And let's do another example. So let's say I have 4 positives and I have 4 negatives. Again, each of those is going to cancel and you're going to be left with 0. Same thing on the number line, even in the other direction, right? I'm going to start at number 4 in the positive and I'm going to add, so I'm getting negatives, which means I'm going to go to the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, and boom. This does happen because 4 and -4 are the same distance away from 0 in general, so they're going to cancel out. Okay, so we're going to use that when we talk about adding integers with different signs. So what happens when we add a positive with a negative, or a negative and a positive? Either way, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to go over a rule first to kind of help you, and then we'll do some examples with it. Okay. So if I'm adding two numbers and the negative number is bigger than the positive number, that answer is going to be negative. If I have two numbers and the positive number is bigger than the negative number, that answer is going to be positive. Okay, now let's look at some examples to kind of help you prove that. So I'm going to do -10 plus 8. And so let's draw it out. I have 10 negatives. Okay, and I have 8 positives. Now, we know that a negative and a positive are going to cancel, and I'm left with 2 negatives left over. Okay, so that means my answer here is going to be -2. And I could have kind of looked at it first and analyzed this a little bit. When I look at the number -10, that is 10 spaces away from 0. When I look at the number 8, that is 8 spaces away from 0. That means -10 is further away. There are more negatives here than there are positives, which means your answer is going to be negative. And the question you're asking yourself is, how many more negatives are there than there are positives? And we can see from our picture that there are 2 more. And now we can also see this on the number line. So I'm going to start at -10 and I'm adding 8. So I'm going to the right 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can see that you land at -2. And there's your answer. Okay? Let's do another example. So I'm going to look at this 7 plus -4. And I'm going to analyze it first. I have +7 and -4. +7 is 7 away from 0. -4 is 4 away from 0. So that means that I have more positives here, and I know my answer is going to be positive. Now, how many more? Some of you might already have that in your head, but let's draw it out. If I have 7 positives and I have 4 negatives, you could cancel the 4 negatives with the 4 positives and see that you have 3 remaining. So you know there were 3 more positives than there were negatives. So let's do this. If I have the number line 7 and I'm going to go left because it's -4, you can see that we end up at +3. And there's your answer. So now I want to talk about the last example. The last example is +6 plus -9. So again, analyzing this first, I think that there are more negatives. Negative 9 is further away than 6. So I know my answer is going to be negative here. But now let's try to figure out the answer. So I have 6 positives, and then I have 9 negatives. So I have those 6 positives are going to cancel with 6 negatives. And again, you're left with 3, so that would be a negative 3 this time. Okay? But I really want to show you what happens on the number line. So for this number line, I'm starting at positive 6, and I'm getting negatives, so I'm going to go left. I have 9 negatives, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I'm going to land right here at negative 3. So that confirms our answer. But what's really important to point out is that this problem passes through 0. So you can kind of use this to help you do some mental math here. If I start at positive 6, I know it's going to take me 6 negatives to get to 0, and then I still have 3 negatives left, which will bring me to negative 3. That's a good way to kind of do this mentally. Instead of having to either draw out the counters or use a number line, you want to envision it in your head and think, okay, how many to get me to 0, and then how many more? That's a really good mental strategy that you can have. So a lot of this takes practice. Remember, no calculator, and good luck.